I'm Patty Kelly, Chair of the ZBA, and I'm glad to welcome you to the special reopened public hearing for the 17 Industrial Drive application. I'd like to take roll first. Henry Rua, Vice Chair, are you here?
Yes.
Joe Mayone?
Yes.
Tim Scott?
Yes.
Ali Strat?
Yes.
And Randy Ricks?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to say that we have a quorum. We have all the board members here. And Holly, I would like to ask if you, as the alternate, will join the board tonight for this application, since you have been a member of this since the beginning. Will you do that?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to have a motion to call this public hearing to order. Somebody on the board like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion, Patty.
Thank you, Tim. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Henry. I think that was Henry. Just to review, this public hearing was called, this reopened public hearing was called because there were two documents that were submitted after the deadline that had been established at the close of our regular public hearing. One was from Mr. Olson, and it pertains to.
If I could just request that the number ending in 35 mute themselves, there seems to be some feedback from that line.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Olson's letter pertained to comments that Mr. Greco had made during the regular public hearing. And the second document was from Mr. Kilby, and it's a document he had submitted to the planning board and asked them to send to us. It showed two maps of his property at 37 Industrial Drive, and it also had some text to it. Both of those are the subject of tonight's meeting. Participants have 5 minutes to comment on any of those documents, or one or more of those documents, and or to rebut anything that was in those documents. And that is the subject of this public hearing. So who would like to go first? Nobody has anything to say?
I certainly do. John
Okay.
Greco.
I can't
John
see. Is that
Greco?
Mr. Gordon?
Mr. Gordon is on, but this is John Greco speaking.
Oh,
Can you hear
okay.
me?
John, yes, of course. Go ahead.
Sure. Pertaining to Mr. Olson's letter, and specifically in regard to Arthur Green. First of all, I think there's a very questionable relevance to the whole issue of Mr. Green and the water tower, except to say that if Verizon did not contact Mr. Green, then they should have. But I completely stand by my comments to this board. I think most of you, if not all of you, know me. I stand by my statements. I was contacted by Arthur Green. I did not contact him. Mr. Green contacted me, and he indicated to me that he was quite surprised at the proposal by Verizon to site a cell tower in the backyards of so many people along Old Kings Highway, and in particular my former homestead and where my sister now resides. And he said he thought it was important for me to know that he had been contacted by Verizon and that Verizon had expressed interest in placing a tower on his property, either on the water tower or adjacent to the water tower, and that they entered into negotiations in order to do that, and that the negotiations fell through over the price of the lease that Mr. Green wanted to obtain from Verizon. I told the board that Mr. Green had informed me of that. I stand by that. That's exactly what he told me. And whether there's some question of who ultimately contacted Mr. Green, Mr. Olson is claiming he and his representatives did not contact Mr. Green. Mr. Green indicated at a later planning board meeting that he thought it was actually, I believe it was Dish Network that had contacted him. That is certainly not what he told me, and I reported to the board accurately what he did. Mr. Olson made some reference to a secret meeting or something. I don't recall ever making reference to any secret meeting. I had indicated that Mr. Green had told me that he had met with Verizon representatives to discuss the terms of a lease, but I don't remember ever making any reference to any secret meeting as claimed by Mr. Olson. But I think the bottom line here is this. If Verizon did not contact Mr. Green, then they certainly should have, because that water tower needs to be completely explored. The target area of Verizon, as this board knows, based upon the multiple applications they have filed, keeps moving around, and their arguments are they need this site or that site, and that's their target area. And basically, it's clear that they're picking a site and then backing in the data to support the particular site that they're urging this zoning board to approve. So I'm sure the board is going to focus on what the true issues are here in terms of the area variance, the substantial area variances that
1 minute, John.
requested by Verizon, and easily and clearly conclude that this particular site is a terrible site for a cell tower right in people's backyards. It's unsafe, it's unsightly, it violates our zoning law, and I'm confident the board will make the right decision here, notwithstanding Mr. Olson's attempts to divert the board's attention from what the real issues are. And thank you very much for your time, service, and attention to this important matter.
Thank you, John. Next, anybody want to say anything? Yes. You're muted. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my name is David Gordon. I'm representing Mr. Greco and several other neighbors. I just have 2 points to make very briefly. This won't take a lot of time. First, and I'm going to rely primarily on the letter that I sent in on Friday addressing the documents. But I'm just going to highlight 2 points for the board. First, I think it's a problem that that the applicant has, in its letter, certainly that we were asked to comment on, and now more generally, has taken a very abusive approach to this application. Clearly, the letter itself was abusive with respect to Mr. Greco, with respect to a neighbor. And as we're seeing more generally, and in terms of the emails today, and Madam Chair, I agree with your comment today sent by email. The commentary has gotten out of hand, both not only in terms of the abusiveness of the content, the personal abuse, but also they're all over the board in terms of staying within the lanes of proper commentary. I want to read very, very quickly part of a statute passed by the legislature almost 30 years ago, which was to protect people against SLAPP suits. Now, I'm not suggesting that what the applicant is doing is a SLAPP suit, but I think that the statement of purpose is very, very applicable. I'm just going to read it very quickly. 2 sentences from the state legislature in 1992. The legislature hereby declares it to be the policy of the state that the rights of citizens to participate freely in the public process must be safeguarded with great diligence. The laws of the state must provide the utmost protection for the free exercise of speech, petition and association rights, particularly where such rights are exercised in a public forum with respect to issues of public concern. This was the preamble to the SLAPP suit law. I think that statement of purpose is very applicable here. And I know that the board has attempted to keep the process open and fair. And we have some criticism of those efforts in our letter. I think that essentially the board has been very liberal in allowing comments, which on the one hand, and if properly governed, is good, but it's gotten out of hand here. Secondly, I just want to correct a comment that the applicant threw in at the last minute again today, very, very quickly. The applicant has made references to a letter that we wrote, talking about the public utility standard. The bottom line is we never said what the applicant is saying we said. We never said the public utility standard is inapplicable to area variances. Our comment on this and the applicability of it and the limited applicability of it is fully explained in our November 15th letter. The bottom line is we didn't say what they're claiming. They are again diverting attention from the real issue, which is that they were claiming the public utility standard could not basically obviated this board's ability to look at the extent of the variance. And that is simply not true, as demonstrated in our November 15th letter and reiterated in the letter last week. And that's pretty much it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead, Brett. I'm sorry,
Madam
Robert.
Chair, yeah. I'm sorry. Did you?
Yes,
is it okay
Mr.
if I go,
Berg.
Ken? Oh,
Yes.
Mr. Berg, sorry.
Good evening, Robert Berg, representing Andy Turco-Levin. I'll start by speaking about Mr. Kilby's written communication about his property at 37 Industrial Drive. Most importantly, Mr. Kilby directed his communication to the planning board, and he was motivated to do so based on comments he listened to at the November 16th, 2021 meeting of the planning board. The communication is stamped received by the planning board on November 19th, 2021, and it's directed to the attention of the Saugerties Planning Board up at the top. Somehow this document was forwarded by the planning board to the ZBA. In any event, it was received by the ZBA after the close of the public hearing here on November 4th, 2021. The bottom line is that Mr. Kilby's written communication about his property at 37 Industrial Drive should not be part of the ZBA's record on this application. He never submitted the communication to the ZBA for its consideration. He never requested that it be considered in a timely fashion. It's too late. Under the circumstances, it would be legal error for the ZBA to consider it. If, for some reason, the ZBA were to consider it, the ZBA should recognize that Mr. Kilby has an obvious economic self-interest in usurping from the owner of 17 Industrial Drive a steady revenue stream of rental income, Tarpon Towers and Verizon. Mr. Kilby wasn't able to strike a deal with Verizon and Tarpon the first go around, and now he wants a second bite at the apple. But for the same reasons that the proposed tower at 17 Industrial Drive is totally inappropriate, it fails at 37 Industrial Drive. The proposed tower would present the same great dangers to public safety at 37 Industrial Drive. Mr. Olson states in his December 10th letter that the setback variance for Mr. Kilby's property are actually double those required at 17 Industrial Drive, ranging from a side variance of 169 feet and a rear variance of 179 feet at one possible site to a side
Does
variance
have to do with anything?
to a side variance of 189 feet at the other site. As my client said in her letter to the ZBA, the tower in Mr. Kilby's property would be less than 100 feet from the front door of her new dog training facility, and her RV parking area would be well within the fall zone of the tower. So the public safety risk from debris falling from the tower or a tower collapse would be extraordinary. Moreover, the tower is going to present the same damage to the surrounding view sheds. The visual intrusion of this industrial monstrosity would damage the neighborhood character and depress surrounding property values, especially to the nearby residents. So it's the same laundry list of horribles as at 17 Industrial Drive. And finally, Mr. Olson asserts that consideration of the Kilby property alternative should fall within the same shot clock period That's really a non-starter for this board. The ZBA has committed to ruling on the pending application for 17 Industrial by January 6, 2021. Mr. Kilby and Tarpon and Verizon don't have any agreement on anything for a lease. This belated attempt by someone to introduce 37 into the mix should not delay resolution of this application any further. Turning to Mr. Olson's personal attack on Mr. Greco, that November 19th letter rapidly attacking Mr. Greco is significant for two reasons. One, Mr. Olson's clients, Tarpon Towers and Verizon, obviously authorized Mr. Olson to submit a mad dog character attack on a lifelong resident of your town, who you all know well, who's objecting to a proposed tower that threatens the physical safety of his sister who lives in the house that he co-owns with her, that lies within the fall zone of the proposed tower. It really proves the point I've repeatedly made to you. This is
1 minute, Mr. Berg, 1 minute.
Okay, this is your community. Your zoning code has been enacted to foster the needs, goals, and desires of your community. It's designed to protect the neighborhood character of your town, to protect your residents, to protect their views, their aesthetics, the property values of your residents, and to direct needed industrial activities to the industrial zone. It's the area of town that's intended for industrial uses, where a telecom tower like this will present only a minimal intrusion. Tarpon Towers and Verizon, they don't care about you or your community. They don't follow your zoning code. They don't follow your rules. They don't care about the harm or the intrusion that a tower at 17 Industrial will cause. And they don't care about attacking anyone who stands in their way. And that's why they go off on Mr. Greco, who's just simply trying to do the right thing here. I thank you for your time and your consideration of the application. I appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to repeat what I said to the attorneys this afternoon in email so that everybody is clear. We will not, as a ZBA, tolerate any aspersions on people's motivations or character, particularly their character, and assign attributes to them based on your own interests. For anybody, I don't care who's going to speak. Let's be professional, talk about the facts as you see them, and leave personalities and attacks on one another out of it. It has no business being here. It's certainly not going to win any points with the ZBA, so we'll just leave it at that. Who's next? Anybody? Yes. Whoever just raised their hand. Ask Tamara, I see. I see an Ask Tamara under your name.
Scott
Mr.
Olson raised his
11
hand.
raised your hand, Patty.
I
Who
saw.
was that?
Yeah, Andy raised her hand. She go ahead.
Oh, I saw another person raise their
Oh,
hand.
I'm sorry.
I also saw that Ray Smith, so Ray Smith also raised his hand as well.
Okay,
If you don't mind, I'm going to be very quick. I mean, obviously,
Thank you.
Mr. Berg outlined a lot of things. Thank you very much for the board, for all the work that you guys have done. I do just feel like I have to say something about Mr. Kilby's letter and the communication. We have to really stick to understanding this. It's not even an application within the board under review at this time. It would have to start over from ground zero. It's not part of this project. It's not part of the application that's in front of you. So I really wanted to point that out. I was very clear in the letter that I submitted to you, along with a site plan circling everything and showing everything. So you guys are aware of what's going on. I just asked that, his property at this point is irrelevant. So I just had to point that out. Thank you very much.
next. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Patty. Appreciate the ZBA listening to me tonight and having the opportunity to speak before the board. I do have some questions for the Tarpon or Verizon engineer, if they're available.
I don't see him.
The
on
RF engineer.
Yes.
I'm sorry, he's not available. He had to be at a different meeting, and since this
Okay.
was limited, I said, and we didn't expect RF issues, so I said it was an emergency meeting. Go ahead. I apologize.
Scott, can you answer some questions on RF?
Well,
Does this have to do with one of the letters, one of the two
No.
letters under subject of discussion
Not that I'm
tonight, Ray?
aware- Not that I'm aware of, Pat. This is questions that I drew up myself.
Okay, if it's something that we've already discussed during public hearings, it's not part of this meeting. This
Okay,
is-
I'm not sure if it's been discussed, so would it be okay
right.
if I just ask a few
Sure,
questions?
ask the question. Go
Okay,
ahead.
and if they are, just let me know, okay? My first question, Scott, is how many Gs will this tower be handling? In other words, we have 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. What is the spectrum Gs that they will be covering?
Okay. May I respond to that?
Sure.
Yes, good.
Just
Okay.
quickly.
So it's going to be a generic response because um, it's primarily for 4G, which is what we're trying to deploy in these types of areas right now. However, I don't believe that 3G has technically been discontinued. So we're still using portions of 3G in connection with 4G. I think that's your answer.
Okay, thank you. Do you happen to know the distance that 3 and 4G will travel?
Well, I think you have to look at the specific frequency, and I don't want to get too much into it because I'm not an engineer. I will just say that one of the frequencies of concern here is the 2100 megahertz frequency. We call it the AWS frequency. It's a higher frequency than something like 850, which is traditionally 3G. The higher frequencies do not travel as far, but I can't give you a distance because it's very dependent on topography, clutter, etc.
I understand that.
Okay.
Mr. Olson, do you remember in one of the previous meetings when we were talking with your engineer, who was very well spoken, he mentioned 2G and the maximum effective range of 2G was 2 miles. So is it safe to say that 3G and 4G is around that proximity?
Yeah, again, I think I would leave that for him. It's really more based on what frequencies you're dealing with. And I'm not trying to be evasive, but if a 3G frequency of like 850 is compared to a higher frequency, they're going to travel at different rates and distances based on the wavelengths.
Okay.
Ray,
And
I
what,
asked this question of the engineer, I believe it was at the November 4th meeting, which the minutes are on the website. I asked the same question that you're trying to get
okay,
an answer to. So he went into a discussion of that. So please reference those minutes and you'll be able to read what he said, or you can listen to the tape of that meeting of the
okay.
same
I'll-
question that I asked. Okay.
I understand, Pat. So I'll get to my recommendation and get to the point. The Mr. Olson, are you familiar with Ulster County Parcel Viewer?
I believe I am.
Okay, so basically what you can do is look at parcels, look at aerial photographs, maps and so forth, and measure accurate distances.
One
from
minute,
spot-
Mr. Smith, 1 minute.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm getting used to this WebEx. Uh, Basically, you can measure the distance from my contention is that the tower should be put at the throughway pull-off. And the reason I'm saying this is that the distance from the throughway pull-off behind J. Mullins and Construction Company is 1.6 miles maximum from the middle of that pull-off to the rear of Mount Marion Park. So the 1.6 miles, I believe, will fall within the range that's required of this frequency. The total distance from the tower behind Big Lots and the Ruby Hot Shop is 5.5 miles. So if we put the tower at the throughway pull-off, you would be 1.6 miles from the park and 1.47 miles from the park to the hot shop.
That's
You would
time.
also be 2.45 miles from the pull-off to the tower behind Big Lots. This is all very close proximity. We're talking 5.5 miles between the three towers. And I'm just asking if, to avoid a lot of controversy, to make it safer, I see a lot of towers on the throughway. Can't we just put the tower over there? And I believe this would solve a lot of the issues.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. I'm going to ask all the participants that as we continue to please stay on the subject of this public hearing. Those two documents that were submitted are the subject of this public hearing. Nothing that has been discussed in the prior public hearings is up for discussion tonight. I know some of you may have some things you want to say, but this is a very specific hearing. Brett, you had something you wanted to say? You're muted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry about that. Members of the board. I represent the applicant Tarpon Towers, as you know, and thank you for letting me speak for a few minutes. I've got to attend to a medical event here in my family, so I need to get going. I have sat by and listened to my company be regarded somewhat disrespectfully, and I'm all for passionate discussion and passionate positions. That's where I believe the input to the board and to understanding everyone's position on a matter leads to a better decision by all. However, I have to let you know that I'm somewhat taken aback by some of the level of the discussion, some of the statements that were made about the company and its contact with others in the community that quite honestly were not true at the time they were made and not true to this moment. Those statements cannot be unheard by this board nor the public and are regrettable in our view. We ask for just a simple apology, nothing more. Regardless of your view of our project, this is my livelihood and my reputation and the reputation of my company. And we ask for respect as we hope that we give respect to others who are participating. And if we haven't given that respect, then shame on us. And I offer my personal apologies and my regret that we have not conducted ourselves in that manner. At the end of the day, I encourage open, respectful communication, and I'm all for it, and hope that I have remained respectful to everyone and their positions over the past year, over the past hearings, which, to be honest with you, we spent a lot of time together that way. In conclusion, I look forward to the board reaching a deliberation and conclusion on this matter and ensuring that all applicants, no matter how regarded their position is by other parties, be treated with respect that's due to everybody. With that being said, I have to, as I mentioned before, attend to a continuing medical matter here in my family, and I won't be able to stay on for the rest of the hearing, but I thank you.
Thank you, Brett. I hope everything is okay.
I hope so too. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Okay, you've got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, Julie-793 Kings
Hi,
Highway.
Julie.
Thank you for hearing me. I sent a letter in, which I think was very relevant to the communications at hand tonight, where Mr. Olson stated that no other viable alternatives have been identified by the zoning board or the public. And I would like to say that we have been asking for other sites to be looked at. And I don't believe that they have taken those sites seriously. They've discounted them before even looking. I also sent some photos of the aerial view on Google Maps that shows such a huge amount of land between Glasgow Turnpike and the pull-off that Mr. Smith alluded to, with absolutely no residences within the nearby area. And I would just ask that more research be done. That's all that we're asking. To look at the small swatch of land where the cluster of houses are and to have a cell phone tower directly behind them. I just don't understand how you can say that we haven't suggested other places. And I don't understand why it's our responsibility as the public to suggest places, but we all on this call, all of the neighbors have made suggestions and talked about the amount of land that is available where there aren't residences, that it would be directly in our backyard needing a variance. So that's really all I wanted to say, and what I said in my letter stands. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Julie. Anybody else? Scott?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the ZBA. I wanted to start off by addressing John Kilby's letter. And just to reiterate that we did reach out to Mr. Kilby before the when we were looking at the industrial drive alternatives. We spoke to him about a possible lease. We came up with some proposed location on his property. And we did detail that in our site selection analysis that I think was Exhibit 6 of the application. The main problem, well, there are two problems. One is that we were not able to come to terms with a lease with Mr. Kilby. I think that was documented. The other potential problem is that the property at 37 Industrial has a building pretty much more or less in the center of the property. So that means that any tower on that property would have to be off center more towards the property lines. And that's what Mr. Kilby showed you. There's one in the northwest corner, a lease area, and a lease in the north center. And that very clearly does increase the variances that we would need if that was something that was pursued. And Mr. Berg is correct. I think I said it just about doubled it. I gave you a table in my letter. That's something for the ZBA, obviously, to consider. The tower would move further away from the residents on Kings Highway. We're not promoting it. We're not saying no. It is technically feasible, but we do not have a lease, and it does have increased setback variances required. There's no question about that. So, but again, if that's something the ZBA wanted us to consider, you would just have to let us know, and we can discuss how we would do that due diligence. But it is technically feasible. In terms of my letter concerning Mr. Greco, people are suggesting that they were personal attacks, and they weren't personal attacks. They were attacks on statements that were made, and we didn't intend to embarrass anybody. We didn't intend to intimidate anybody. But I went back to the older versions of the videos where I referenced the secret meeting, and I looked at that meeting, and what Mr. Greco said. He was very, very emphatic about this meeting, the secret meeting. So when Mr. Green said just the opposite and said, no, we never met with Verizon, that is 180 degrees different. I'm not, I don't know I can only tell you what I've heard, what Mr. Greco has said and what Mr. Green has said. Mr. Green, to me, made it very convincingly sound like he spoke with Dish Wireless, not Verizon, not Tarpon. So whether that's relevant or not, we thought the ZBA should know, just because I didn't bring the issue up. It was raised by Mr. Greco. And if information provided was incorrect, we just wanted the ZBA to know. He's explained himself tonight. Again, I wasn't a party to it, so I can't tell you. All I can say is it wasn't a personal attack, but we were attacking the fact that what was said at two different meetings by two different people were two different stories. So something's not right. And we just thought that the ZBA should know. In terms of, Mr. Gordon's reference to the slap suit, I don't know if that's intended to intimidate or something. Again, we're not intending to any type of slap suit here, but we are allowed to question these facts, and that's exactly what we did. And I'm sorry if that was offensive. Mr. Gordon shaking his head. Why? If we think someone's lied, we can't ask that question. We can't make that statement if we have some evidence to that effect.
But
We're
1
allowed
minute.
to do that. Again, it wasn't personal, and it's not, it's not a personal attack. But no one can deny there are two different stories. We had a right to raise it.
Thank you. Mr. Olson, before you turn off your mic, I have a question about the Kilby letter. The thing that really struck me about the Kilby letter wasn't the text, because he has been on meetings and has spoken to us about those things. What struck me and bothered me were the maps. You never, ever presented the ZBA with two site maps on that property. You presented us with only site A at that first meeting when you showed us 17 Industrial Drive and the 37. and told us that he was agreeable at the beginning, but then he had gone silent and he hadn't responded any further. And you said that there were more variances that would be required. That's the extent of what you said to us about 37 Industrial Drive. I went back and read all the minutes. I looked at the videos again, and it never went further. The fact that you thought, or Tectonic thought, that there was a site that was viable enough to do a second site plan, and you did not think that should be something that you should show the ZBA, is troubling. I don't know why you didn't. I don't know. I don't understand it. You never discussed with us that you had been in negotiations with him. You just dropped it right after that initial meeting of the two properties. And I find that to be problematic personally.
Sure. Well,
That's all I want to say.
if I may respond to that, I believe that the two maps, we did submit a map showing.
You submitted
the
one
site.
map.
Correct. That was the site that Mr. Kilby wanted us to utilize. He didn't want us to utilize the other one, even though we put it together. So, and in fact, I think if you read his letter, I don't have it in front of me. He says, even if you didn't like the site in, I think, the northwest corner, I may be willing to use the north center one. But at the time, that wasn't really a viable option because, and again, I wasn't part of the conversations. What I'm hearing is he didn't want that. There was another location next to his building. We didn't submit that because he said, no, I don't want you to use that.
Did you
So
do
it
a
wasn't-
site plan on it? Did you do a site plan like you did on the other ones?
Well, we didn't do site plans. It's semantics. They weren't site plans, but they were just sketches. Yes, we did that. It's not shown because Mr. Kilby's attitude is he didn't want it. So it was a no-go. We weren't trying to withhold anything, but the property owner does have a say in where on the property to put this. And I don't know if it was one meeting or two meetings, but we did disclose that we negotiated with Mr. Kilby. In fact, we said the lease, there was no agreement as to the lease. He hired an attorney, so it was more than just one meeting. And the attorney proposed conditions that were just were not acceptable.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Mr. Olson, you said that, you just stated that the property owner has a say as to where the tower is going when you're leasing or renting the property from him?
The property owner, because he has the property interest, absolutely can tell us where he's willing to lease the property.
Okay, so on 17 Industrial Drive, you had it located at one spot. That's where they must have wanted it. The property owner said, okay, this is where we want it. But you in turn moved it. So tell me what happened.
That was a wetland issue. So they put it.
I understand that, but
Right.
where's the property owner?
The property owner's okay with it. They were agreeable to it.
Oh.
Yeah, it was only a 41-foot move to the south, and they could have said no.
Mhm.
Like their property,
you're-
they have
you're
that
just-
right.
The same issue that you're going after Mr. Greco for, you decided three different issues where you heard this and you heard that, but you weren't privy to it, but this is what you heard. Well, you know, let's put this thing to rest. Mr. Greco just told you that this is what Arthur Green called and told him. Mr. Greco didn't call Arthur Green. I'm taking this all in as we're speaking. So I don't think Mr. Greco could be any more upfront and saying, hey, wait a minute, I stand by my statement. This is what Green told me. And you seem to have a problem with it. Verizon seems to have a problem with it. But yet you can make statements and no one can question it. So my point being is, let's stop playing like kids. And okay, he told you how it all came to be. Put this thing to bed instead of beating it up. Okay, Green told him this here. From Green's mouth to Mr. Greco's ears, that's what he said. Mr. Greco just told it from his mouth to you. What more do you need? Let's put this thing to bed. It's over with.
I don't need anything more. I just thought there was a discrepancy.
Then let's end it. I don't want to hear no more
Yeah,
about
I wasn't
this, that, and
talking
the other
about
thing.
that. I'm fine with that.
Good. I'm glad you're fine with it because I'm tired of it.
Hey, anybody else have anything they'd like to say about either of those two? Yes, Mike, go ahead.
So I also submitted a letter to the board regarding Mr. Olson's comments about us not putting forth alternative places for him to examine, even though it's his responsibility to examine everything within that 2-mile radius. And I did a quick search online and suggested a couple of possible alternatives that apparently were never explored that would move the tower at least 1,000 feet further away from the nearest residence, would offer some tree cover because they would be located in the tree line at the thruway, which would, eliminate some of the silhouetting issues, and just wanted to hear why those sites weren't considered when they were looking for places to go. They also would be either the same distance or a minimal increase in distance from the Mount Marion Park, maybe no more than 200 feet further away.
Any answer?
That was directed, I guess, at Mr. Olson, since he said we didn't come up with any possible alternatives.
What, I mean, I'm not sure what alternatives you're referring to.
Talking about land
He
along
just
the
told you.
thruway, putting it along the thruway.
I think Mike
The fear-
Crosby addressed that. I think it was at the November 4th meeting, including the rest stop, which was raised earlier. I think Mike had addressed all those. And
No, actually he didn't, because the rest stop is further north. This is nowhere near that far north. And as I said, since Mount Marion Park coverage was one of your primary concerns, and this is only an additional 200 feet in distance as the crow flies from Mount Marion Park, I was wondering why that wasn't considered, especially since it's so much further away from residences.
yeah, I'm not sure exactly where it is. Is it in the proper zoning district? If it's
It
only
is, actually. It's the industrial zone. I gave section, block, and lot numbers. It's the south border, the western border of the Fear Brothers property. There's also a Central Hudson property, but that gets closer to Andy's proper project. It would actually be a little like 100 or 200 feet closer to her project than 17 Industrial. But if you go on the Fear Brothers property, it's at least the same distance as it is now. And as I said, it's really no further away from Mount Marion Park and seems to solve some of the variance issues, if not almost all of them.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that property. Sorry.
That's a bad thing to say, don't you think?
No, because
Shouldn't you be intimately familiar with that property since you were supposed to look at everything that was a possibility in the area?
well, that's not necessarily what the standard is, but we've had that conversation. No, we're not supposed to look at every single property.
You're supposed to look at viable property.
Correct. We are. And we found viable property in the proper zoning district. Correct.
Yeah, but it requires major variances because it's being cited in a place where it shouldn't be cited.
Again, I think the zoning law talks about where these things should be cited. We didn't make that rule up. That's what the town board did. They said it was appropriate for the OLI zoning district. So
Provided you could meet the required setbacks and buffers and
These
everything
attorneys
else.
are great.
Can we have
Okay.
the comments directed to the board? We're not going to be having a question and answer and a.
that's fine. I'm sorry. Yep.
No, thank you.
Anybody else have anything to say about the two letters? And I'm going to ask again, the two documents that were submitted late that are the subject of this conversation, the Kilby letter and the Olson letter about Mr. Greco. Those are the two documents that are subject to this hearing tonight. If anybody has anything else to say, please do so. We want you to have your say, whether it be a comment or a rebuttal. Don't want
Okay.
anybody to go and feel they didn't have a chance to comment on the late information that was not subject to the public hearing.
Patty, I see we have a couple people on phones. They can unmute themselves with *6.
Is there anything in chat where somebody is indicating they want to say something?
No.
Okay. Is there any member of the board that has anything that they'd like to say about any of this, other than the comment that I made about not getting that second site property description on the Kilby plot? Anybody else? Okay. Then I will make a motion for the board to close this public hearing. Is there a second? Any board member want to second that motion?
I'll second it.
Who is that, Holly?
That was Joe.
Joe, okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, the public hearing is now closed. And this application will be on the agenda for January 6th. And we hope to have a decision at that point. Thank you all, and thanks for your participation, and have a wonderful holiday. All
Thank
of you.
you. You
Patty,
too.
do you want to just adjourn, a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Oh, good. Thank you. Somebody make a motion to adjourn the meeting, please.
I make a motion, we adjourn, Patty.
Henry, can I have a second?
Second.
Tim, second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Good night, everybody. Happy holidays to all of
Happy
you.
holidays. Happy New Year.
Night.
Everyone.